In a ruthless environment like Hollywood, having one's true sexual orientation exposed could be the full stop at the end of a star's career. It wasn't just a personal revelation, it was a cultural shock. A rupture of trust that made even the most devoted fans turn their backs instantly when they felt they had been deceived for decades. Some were forced to come out in humiliation as clumsy secret photographs with same-sex lovers flooded newspaper front pages. Others, in their desperate attempt to conceal the truth through a picture-perfect marriage, unintentionally transformed a scandal into one of the most devastating deceptions in entertainment history. There were even those who, at the very peak of their prestigious award-winning careers, suddenly lost everything, permanently blacklisted by studios over a single exposed moment of infidelity. The 10 explosive scandals below stand as the clearest proof that in such a merciless environment, even one truth revealed at the wrong time could destroy everything. Marlon Brando, the great legend. Hollywood feared because he refused to live by its script. Marlon Brando was not merely a movie star. He was the man who fundamentally changed how Hollywood understood masculinity. Before Brando, men on screen were expected to be polished, restrained, and formulaic. After Brando, masculinity became wilder, more complex, full of contradictions, and deeply human. His influence was so immense that every generation of male actors that followed from Robert De Niro to Al Pacino carried Brando's imprint in one way or another. Because of that, Hollywood both worshipped him and quietly feared him. Marlon Brando didn't just shatter acting conventions. He also broke the boundaries the industry tried desperately to impose on the private lives of its stars. While most actors of his era lived cautiously monitoring every gesture and every word, Brando was one of the rare figures who refused to perform the role of the ideal man off-screen. The turning point came in 1976, when Brando gave an interview to Playboy magazine. In that conversation, he openly admitted that he had experienced intimate relationships with men, and if that made anyone uncomfortable, he simply did not care. He added that he felt no shame whatsoever, because to him it was merely a natural part of the human experience. This detail is critically important because it did not come from rumor or backstage whispers, it came directly from Marlon Brando himself. In an era when most stars were still forced to conceal even a glance, the most iconic symbol of Hollywood masculinity. Saying this out loud was nothing short of a direct challenge to the entire system. From that moment on, Brando was no longer seen merely as a difficult or rebellious actor. He began to be viewed as someone fundamentally uncontrollable in terms of public image. Hollywood's doors began to close in the coldest possible way. Major scripts became less frequent, and iconic leading roles stopped finding their way to him as they once had. Brando did not collapse in a dramatic scandal, but he was gradually pushed out of the center of power he himself had once ruled. Within that context, scrutiny of Brando's private life intensified. One of the most famous and controversial rumors involved James Dean, the young rebel icon of Hollywood. Several biographies, including James Dean Tomorrow Never Comes, suggest that James Dean's admiration for Brando went beyond professional respect, and that Dean may have actively pursued or flirted with him. Brando, according to these accounts, was keenly aware of his own magnetism, not only toward women, but toward men as well. However, it must be stated clearly that there is no verified evidence proving that Brando and James Dean ever had a relationship beyond friendship or professional admiration. What exists are second-hand accounts from friends and colleagues, along with the highly speculative atmosphere of Hollywood at the time. As such, this story should be understood as part of Hollywood's cultural mythology rather than an established historical fact. Years later, however, another revelation emerged that the public could not ignore. In 2018, Jennifer Lee, the widow of comedian Richard Pryor, confirmed in an interview that her husband had once had an intimate relationship with Marlon Brando. According to her, this was not a secret among Pryor's close circle, and Brando was known for being open-minded, curious, and willing to place rigid boundaries on emotional or physical connection. Richard Pryor had already spoken publicly about his fluid sexuality during his lifetime, which led journalists and cultural scholars to regard this confirmation as credible. Although the truth only surfaced after both men had passed away, it completed the portrait of Marlon Brando as a man who refused to be confined within any fixed identity. Yet this very refusal explains why Hollywood never truly forgave him. Brando was never erased from film history, but he was removed from the safe circle. He continued to be revered, but no longer protected. He was still referenced, but no longer granted power in the way he once had. Marlon Brando's tragedy lies here. He was too great to be discarded, yet too honest to be fully embraced by a system built on pretense. And if Marlon Brando was the man who dared to speak the truth, Hollywood did not want to hear the next figure on this list is someone who paid the price for an entire lifetime simply because he was never allowed to say it at all. Rock Hudson, the perfect man. Hollywood, slowly suffocated to death. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Rock Hudson was the perfect embodiment of the American masculinity. Hollywood wanted to sell to the world. He was tall, strong, elegant, with a calm smile and a flawless appearance. On screen, Hudson was always the ideal man, a man who loved women, protected women, and represented the traditional family ideal that post-war America revered. But behind that image lay a truth that, if exposed, would have ended his career instantly. Rock Hudson was gay, an absolute catastrophe for an A-list male star at that time. This was not merely a scandal. It was the end of every contract, every role, and every ounce of glory Hollywood had built around him. Rock Hudson was born Roy Harold Scherer, Jr. He entered Hollywood with striking looks, but that same asset placed him under the strictest control imaginable. Hudson rapidly became one of the biggest stars of his era, and in doing so, he ceased to belong to himself. His life split into two rigidly separated layers, a flawless masculine icon in public and a private life that had to be hidden so completely it became suffocating. The man who controlled Rock Hudson's life was Henry Wilson, a powerful and calculating Hollywood agent. Wilson knew Hudson was gay, and rather than protecting him, he turned that knowledge into leverage. He changed Roy Scherer's name to Rock Hudson, constructed the image of the perfect male star, arranged fake dates with leading actresses, and repeatedly extinguished rumors through carefully manufactured narratives. When whispers began to spiral out of control, Wilson proposed the final solution: a marriage to deceive the public. In 1955, Rock Hudson married Phyllis Gates. This union was not born of love. It was a strategic arrangement designed to preserve an image. Just 3 years later, they divorced, but the consequences endured far longer. After the marriage ended, Phyllis Gates published a memoir titled My Husband, Rock Hudson. While she never stated it outright, the book strongly implied Hudson's true identity. It became one of the most famous unspoken confirmations in Hollywood history, and the marriage has since been remembered as one of the classic lavender marriages of the Golden Age, where an artist's personal life was completely sacrificed for image preservation. Even so, Rock Hudson continued to live in silence. He maintained his career, continued portraying the dream man for millions, while his private life retreated deeper into darkness. Only those closest to him knew about the relationship that truly mattered in his later years. Mark Christian. Mark Christian was Rock Hudson's longest-lasting and most clearly acknowledged partner. They met in the early 1980s and lived together discreetly for many years. Mark remained by Hudson's side until the very end as his health rapidly deteriorated. To those who knew them, Mark was not merely a companion. He was Hudson's true life partner in his final chapter. In 1985, Rock Hudson died from AIDS-related complications. He became the first major A-list Hollywood star to publicly succumb to the disease. At the time, AIDS was surrounded by fear, stigma, and profound misinformation. The death of one of Hollywood's greatest masculine icons from AIDS sent shockwaves across the globe. Hudson's passing forced the media, the public, and the U.S. government to confront a crisis they had ignored for far too long. For the first time, America was forced to reckon with the truth that its perfect idols had lived hidden lives marked by fear and isolation. Many historians later referred to Rock Hudson as the first Hollywood star who forced America to take AIDS seriously. In the aftermath of his death, numerous AIDS research and support foundations were established. Rock Hudson's image began to be re-examined with compassion rather than judgment. He became a symbol of an entire generation of artists who were forced to live two lives, one for the public and one for themselves, the life they were never allowed to acknowledge. But not everyone who carried that secret met a tragic end like Rock Hudson. Some stars chose absolute silence, meticulously controlled their image until their final days, and in doing so managed to preserve their careers intact. Paul Newman, the man saved by a lifetime of silence. In the history of classic Hollywood, very few stars possessed an image as flawless and nearly impenetrable as Paul Newman's. He had acting talent revered by critics' looks that captivated the public and a long-lasting stable marriage, something Hollywood eagerly held up as proof of a proper life. Because of this, Paul Newman was considered the ultimate safe symbol. A man without trouble, without scandal, without controversy. Yet behind that perfection, whispers never truly disappeared. For decades, rumors about Newman's private life lingered like a shadow, never clear enough to explode into scandal, but never fully fading away either. Hollywood knew this, and Paul Newman knew it too. Unlike Marlon Brando, who dared to speak his truth, Newman chose a different path: absolute silence. He neither denied nor confirmed anything. He revealed nothing that could fracture the carefully constructed image. This silence was not accidental. It was a survival strategy within a system that showed no mercy toward deviation. However, Newman's career was not always smooth. There was a period when everything stood on the brink of collapse after he suffered a serious accident while pursuing his passion for auto racing. The incident caused Hollywood to question whether he could continue embodying the image of the perfect man. In an industry terrified of risk, even a single sign of instability was enough for major opportunities to quietly disappear. At that moment, Newman's silence became his life raft. He allowed the public to know nothing beyond what they were permitted to see. No explanations, no personal revelations, no emotional openness. And because of this, his career did not collapse publicly. It was saved in the coldest possible way through the sacrifice of truth. Paul Newman's close relationships also fueled speculation that endured for many years. Early in his career, he shared a particularly close bond with James Dean. Both were young faces carrying rebellious energy, deeply influenced by a new, emotionally raw acting style. While there is no evidence suggesting their relationship went beyond professional affinity, their closeness consistently raised eyebrows, especially in a Hollywood that was extremely sensitive to such associations. Newman also formed a deep connection with Montgomery Clift, a brilliant but fragile actor who constantly struggled with inner turmoil and social pressure. Newman was notably close to Clift, offering empathy and understanding, rarely seen in an industry known for its coldness and brutality. In Hollywood's eyes, that level of emotional closeness alone was sometimes enough to invite scrutiny, even when nothing was ever spoken aloud. Yet Paul Newman never allowed these relationships to drift beyond the boundaries of safety. He built a stable marriage, maintained the image of the exemplary husband, and kept an absolute distance between the public and his inner world. His career was preserved, but the cost was a silence that lasted until the end of his life. Paul Newman's tragedy was not a loud downfall, but the necessity of trading truth for longevity. He lived fully through his roles on screen, but the man behind the lights was never allowed to speak. In a Hollywood where speaking out meant disappearing, Newman chose to survive by saying nothing at all. But not everyone was given the chance to remain silent for so long. Some were too luminous, too rebellious, and lived too briefly to hide everything. James Dean, an eternal icon, carrying a self that was never allowed to live. James Dean remains one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. He embodied rebellious youth, unexplained loneliness, and a fragile yet intensely powerful form of masculinity. With only a handful of films, Dean became a global legend, a face printed on posters, T-shirts, and embedded in the collective memory of generations. Yet that very fame became the cage that imprisoned his true self. Surrounding James Dean were constant rumors about his private life, about attachments that stretched beyond what Hollywood allowed. But unlike Marlon Brando, who dared to speak, or Paul Newman, who chose strategic silence, James Dean never had the chance to confirm or deny anything. He died too young, carrying every possibility of living openly with him. James Dean's tragedy was not a public collapse, but becoming a legend too quickly, too early. His sudden death froze his image forever in a suspended state, both free and controlled, both worshipped and forbidden from being fully himself. Among the relationships most frequently discussed, the name Rogers Brackett stands out as the clearest and most significant. Brackett was a fashion photographer and an influential mentor during James Dean's early steps into Hollywood. He was much older, well-connected, experienced, and capable of opening doors that a young, ambitious Dean desperately sought. James Dean lived with Rogers Brackett for a period when he was first entering the entertainment industry. Unlike other vague rumors, Brackett later openly acknowledged that a relationship existed between them, one that involved emotional closeness and crossed conventional boundaries. He described James Dean as curious, ambitious, and unwilling to confine himself within rigid definitions of sexuality or emotional connection. What is crucial here is that this relationship was not built on secrecy from Brackett's side. It was society and Hollywood that forced James Dean into silence. At the time, any association with something deemed non-conforming could instantly end a rising star's career. Thus, even though the relationship with Brackett was real and acknowledged from one side, it was never allowed to exist publicly. Beyond Rogers, Brackett, Marlon Brando's name is also frequently mentioned in discussions about James Dean. Dean was known to hold a deep admiration for Brando, not only for his talent, but for who he was as a person. Brando embodied the kind of liberated masculinity Dean yearned for, fearless, unapologetic, and unscripted. Some sources suggest that Dean actively sought Brando out, hoping for closeness and a deeper connection than a mere professional respect. However, like many stories surrounding James Dean, this connection exists largely in second-hand accounts and recollections from those around them. There is no definitive evidence, no confirmation from Dean himself, and no opportunity for him to speak. What remains is a fragment of Hollywood mythology where the boundary between truth and imagination is perpetually blurred. James Dean's death at the age of 24 ended any possibility for him to define himself on his own terms. The public was left only with an immortal image, the rebellious, lonely, enigmatic youth. But the real man behind the lights, with his curiosities, his attachments, and desires that never found language, was buried forever with the legend. And if James Dean was a star extinguished too early to self-destruct, the next figure on this list stands as a painful testament to a prolonged tragedy, one where talent, pressure, and secrecy slowly crushed a human being from within. Montgomery Clift, a cinematic genius who self-destructed because he was never allowed to be himself. Montgomery Clift was regarded by critics and peers as one of the most gifted actors of his generation. On screen, he embodied a completely different kind of masculinity, fragile, profound, emotionally rich, and vulnerable. At a time when many male stars still relied on rigid toughness and conventional charisma, Clift drew audiences into silences, glances, and pain that needed no explanation. But that very sensitivity became a burden in a Hollywood that never knew where to place him. Montgomery Clift did not fit the proper male image the industry was determined to protect. And unlike Paul Newman, who chose silence in order to survive, Clift did not have the capacity nor the cruelty toward himself to fully conceal who he truly was. Today, film historians are almost in agreement that Montgomery Clift was gay or bisexual with a strong preference toward men. He never publicly disclosed this because at the time doing so would have been almost the same as ending his career by his own hand. However, unlike the vague rumors surrounding many other stars, Clift's case is supported by a large amount of powerful, indirect evidence. These confirmations come from close friends, people who were intimately connected to him, serious scholarly biographies, and even internal Hollywood records. Clift was not merely the subject of speculation. He was a person who lived truthfully in private spaces, even while wearing a silent mask in public. Among the relationships most frequently mentioned, Libero Gigante is the name that appears with the greatest consistency and seriousness. Gigante was a man outside the film industry, not part of Hollywood's glamorous world. Their relationship has been described as deep, long-lasting, and discreet, one of the few bonds that made Clift feel safe in a life constantly under surveillance. In addition, Jack Larson, an actor who later became an art collector, openly acknowledged having had an intimate relationship with Montgomery Clift. Larson did not hide his own orientation, and his confirmation is considered highly credible by researchers. The two knew each other through artistic circles, where Clift felt more understood than he ever did within Hollywood's harsh machine. Yet even with rare private moments of authenticity, the long pressure never released Clift. He was forced to split himself into fragments, the artist on screen, the symbol in public, and the lonely individual behind closed doors. That internal tearing gradually eroded his mental health. Then came a serious accident, an irreversible turning point. After the crash, Clift's appearance changed, his health declined, and his inner insecurity grew heavier. Addiction and depression were not the sole causes of his downfall, but the consequences of a life suppressed for far too long. Hollywood, which once worshipped him for being different, now no longer knew what to do with a genius who was breaking apart. Major roles became less frequent. Studio patience ran out. Clift was not erased overnight, but he was abandoned piece by piece. His career shattered not because he lacked talent, but because he no longer had the strength to keep performing as someone he had never truly been. Montgomery Clift's tragedy lies here. He did not die young like James Dean to become an eternal legend, nor was he hardened enough like Paul Newman to hold the wall of silence intact. He lived long enough to be worn down by his own inner life, and he was too real to adapt to a system built on pretending. And if Montgomery Clift is proof of a talent crushed from within, then the next person on this list is the story of an actor imprisoned for life inside a single role where the real man and the fictional character merged in the most painful way. Anthony Perkins, imprisoned for a lifetime in Norman Bates and in his true identity. Anthony Perkins entered film history with a role that brought him glory and became a curse he could never escape. When Psycho premiered in 1960, Norman Bates instantly became one of the most haunting characters ever put on screen, and at the same time Anthony Perkins became permanently attached to the image of someone abnormal, unstable, and dangerous. Before Psycho, Perkins had been seen as a promising, romantic leading man. He had a bookish, intelligent, sensitive look, very different from the hard-edged masculinity celebrated at the time. But that difference made Hollywood unsure where to place him, especially because his private life did not align with the model the industry wanted to protect. Today, Anthony Perkins being gay has been widely confirmed through multiple trustworthy sources. Memoirs, close friends, people who were deeply connected to him and even his family after his death. While Perkins was alive, he never publicly stated it, but within artistic circles it was not truly a secret. His silence was not a lack of courage, it was because the cost of speaking was simply too high. The most frequently mentioned relationship in Anthony Perkins' life is with Tab Hunter, another Hollywood heartthrob, who later came out publicly. The two dated in the late 1950s during a period when both were at the peak of their careers. According to Tab Hunter's memoir, it was a serious and emotionally intense relationship. Hunter described Perkins as exceptionally intelligent and sensitive, but living in constant fear. fear of being discovered, fear of losing everything. Beyond Tab Hunter, Perkins is also believed to have had a short but intense relationship with Rudolf Nureyev, the legendary ballet dancer who lived openly and authentically. The two met through artistic circles, where Perkins briefly felt understood. The bond did not last, but it is often remembered as a rare moment when Perkins could live closer to his true self. Yet the greatest shock of Perkins's life came from the very role that defined him. After Psycho Hollywood quietly branded him as dangerous, suggesting that his difference, his fragility, and his private orientation were somehow linked to Norman Bates. No one said it aloud, but the implication was unmistakable. Perkins was no longer suitable as a romantic leading man. Under crushing pressure from both the industry and society, Anthony Perkins tried to fix himself. He underwent conversion therapy, believing he could change in order to become acceptable. In 1973, he married Barry Berenson, a photographer and actress. The marriage produced children and contained care and attachment, but it could not erase the true self Perkins had spent years trying to deny. His career did not collapse overnight, but it faded slowly and painfully. Major roles gradually disappeared. Perkins was increasingly pushed into supporting parts into repeated versions of Norman Bates, as if Hollywood refused to allow him to exist in any other form. In 1992, Anthony Perkins died from AIDS-related complications. What is heartbreaking is that he only revealed his health condition shortly before his death, still carrying the shame society had placed on him for his entire life. Today, Perkins is remembered as a profoundly talented actor and also as a victim of stigma, authoritarian Hollywood control, and brutal concepts of masculinity that left no room for difference. But if Anthony Perkins is the tragedy of a man imprisoned while alive, the next story is the horror of a star destroyed even after death. Ramon Novarro, the Latin lover who died in isolation and was smeared even in death. Ramon Novarro was once one of the most desired men on the planet. Born in 1899 under the name José Ramón Gil Samaniego, he was an A-list star of silent-era Hollywood and the embodiment of elegant, romantic, and irresistibly alluring Latin beauty. His role in Ben-Hur, 1925, catapulted him to the peak of fame, transforming him into a global idol. But behind that brilliance lay a life forced to exist in fear. Today, film historians widely regard Ramon Novarro's homosexuality as an established fact. During his lifetime, he could not publicly acknowledge it, not as a personal choice, but because such a reality was virtually impossible within the Hollywood of that era. Nevertheless, close friends, underground communities, and even police records related to his death all indirectly confirm this truth. One of the most persistent rumors surrounding Ramon Novarro involves Rudolph Valentino, the greatest sex symbol of the silent film era. Both men were of Latin heritage, both were othered and idolized by Hollywood, and they were known to be close. This closeness fueled countless whispers. However, it must be clearly stated that there is no direct evidence confirming a relationship beyond friendship. This story belongs more to Hollywood mythology than to verified historical fact. To conceal Novarro's sexual orientation, the studios forced him into the image of a devout, morally upright man deeply committed to Catholicism, one who avoided romantic scandal entirely. He was not seen publicly with women, did not party, and maintained a carefully controlled persona. In reality, this was not virtue, but isolation. When the era of sound arrived, Novarro's voice no longer aligned with changing audience tastes. Roles became scarce, money ran dry, and his stardom vanished. From a global icon, he became invisible, living alone in fear and solitude, an easy target in an unforgiving society. In 1968, tragedy reached its peak. Two drug-addicted brothers, Paul and Tom Ferguson, broke into Ramon Novarro's home. They brutally assaulted him, leading to his death. What is especially chilling is that they targeted Novarro because they believed he was wealthy and vulnerable due to his private life. When they failed to find money, violence became their final outlet. This is considered one of the earliest Hollywood-linked murders driven by anti-gay hatred. Yet even after his death, the tragedy did not end. The media at the time avoided discussing the true motive, softened the nature of the crime, and twisted Novarro's death into a lurid, sensationalized story. Only decades later was the truth told accurately, allowing Ramon Novarro to be recognized as a victim of prejudice rather than a scandal. From a worshipped Latin lover to a death distorted by shame, Ramon Novarro stands as a chilling reminder that Hollywood can create idols and just as readily abandon them when the lights go out. And if Ramon Novarro represents the tragedy of a star killed by isolation, the next story is that of Hollywood's golden boy discarded simply for loving the wrong person at the wrong time. Tab Hunter, the dream boy. Forced to walk away from the spotlight. In the 1950s, Tab Hunter was the perfect embodiment of the all-American boyfriend Hollywood wanted to offer to America. He was young, athletic, and carried the clean-cut boy-next-door charm that filled teenage girls' bedrooms with posters. With films like Damn Yankees and Battle Cry, Tab Hunter quickly became one of the most sought-after heartthrobs on screen. His real name was Arthur Andrew Kelm, born in 1931, but that name all but disappeared once Hollywood began constructing a new identity. Tab Hunter, the flawless, ideal heterosexual man with no cracks, no shadows. It was a meticulously calculated image because even the smallest fracture could bring the entire illusion crashing down. Today, Tab Hunter's homosexuality is no longer disputed. He publicly confirmed it in his memoir, Tab Hunter, Confidential, The Making of a Movie Star, published in 2005 at a time when Hollywood no longer had the power to punish him. The book caused a sensation due to its rare honesty. He did not apologize for who he was. It sold extremely well, as if the public had been waiting half a century to hear that story. But during his years at the top, that truth was forbidden. The studios, especially Warner Brothers, constructed a series of fake relationships to protect Hunter's image. He was forced to date actresses, appear in public as a man madly in love while his real life had to remain absolutely hidden. Tabloids constantly threatened exposure, turning his daily existence into a cycle of anxiety and vigilance. The most significant and clearly confirmed relationship in Tab Hunter's life was with Anthony Perkins. The two dated in the late 1950s when both were at the height of their careers. It was a serious, deeply emotional relationship, but one defined by fear. In his memoir, Hunter wrote a brief yet haunting sentence, "We were in love, but we lived in fear." That line encapsulates the tragedy of an entire generation of artists forced to love in the shadows. What sets Tab Hunter apart from many others on this list is that he never turned against himself. He did not internalize shame, nor did he believe that his true self was wrong. Hollywood's pressure exhausted him, but it did not fully destroy his spirit. Rather than continuing to play the heartthrob until he shattered, Hunter gradually withdrew from the center of the spotlight, choosing to trade fame for inner peace. This choice is what makes Tab Hunter's story different. He did not self-destruct like Montgomery Clift, nor was he imprisoned for life in a single role like Anthony Perkins. He stepped away from the boyfriend of America image while he was still loved before Hollywood could crush the person he truly was. Later in life, Tab Hunter lived a life that many of his peers never had the chance to experience. He shared a long-term partnership with Alan Glazer for over 30 years, living peacefully and authentically until the end. In retrospect, he is remembered not only as a Hollywood heartthrob, but as a man who chose to live rather than remain a symbol. But not everyone had the time, strength, or luck to step away as Tab Hunter did. Some were swept too far too fast, and by the time they realized it, there was no path back. Sal Mineo, the young star, Hollywood erased before society killed him. Sal Mineo was one of the brightest young talents Hollywood ever produced. Born in 1939, he stepped into the spotlight at a very young age and quickly made waves with his role as Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. starring alongside James Dean. At just 16 years old, Mineo received an Academy Award nomination, an exceptionally rare achievement that seemed to guarantee a brilliant future. But Sal Mineo was not like other young stars. He represented a kind of masculinity that was fragile, sensitive, and deeply vulnerable, something Hollywood found both fascinating and unsettling. On screen, Mineo's eyes always carried a profound loneliness, and off-screen, he did not conceal himself as completely as many of his contemporaries did. Today, Sal Mineo's homosexuality is considered an established fact. He never made an official press announcement, but he also never denied it when asked, and he lived relatively openly within the gay communities of New York and Hollywood. In the 1950s and 1960s, this was extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily dangerous for a career. The most frequently discussed relationship in Sal Mineo's life was with James Dean. Mineo openly admitted that he loved Dean a deep, unrequited, and painful affection. James Dean was very close to Mineo and valued him as a friend and colleague, but he never confirmed a relationship beyond that. Dean was believed to have a complex emotional life, but he did not return Mineo's feelings in the way Mineo had hoped. This is regarded as one of the earliest openly acknowledged same-sex loves in Hollywood history, and also as a wound that never healed for Mineo. Beyond James Dean, Sal Mineo is believed to have had relationships with other artists, including Lawrence Harvey, the Lithuanian-British actor famed for Room at the Top. Multiple biographies and industry accounts suggest that Mineo and Harvey shared an emotional bond while working together in theater and film. Other names such as Bobby Driscoll, Don Johnson, and even Rita Hayworth, often cited as a possible image-shielding relationship, also appear in backstage narratives revealing a private life that was both rich and perilous. After Rebel Without a Cause, Hollywood's attitude toward Sal Mineo shifted rapidly. He refused to play the role of the proper heterosexual leading man and would not completely erase himself. The industry's response was cold and ruthless. Leading roles disappeared, and he was pushed into secondary parts, often as deviant, antagonistic, or dangerous characters. Mineo was typecast and gradually pushed out of the spotlight's center, even though his talent never diminished. In his personal life, Mineo chose authenticity, but the cost was isolation. He had relationships with men and did not hide them within artistic circles, yet he received no protection from the media or studio system. Stigma, ridicule, and unspoken threats surrounded him in a society unprepared to accept difference. In 1976, the tragedy reached its end. Sal Mineo was murdered in a Los Angeles alley after leaving a rehearsal. The official conclusion labeled it a robbery, but many believe the killing carried elements of anti-gay hatred, especially given its proximity to gay neighborhoods and the long-standing hostility directed at Mineo. To this day, his death is remembered as the dark conclusion of a man who dared to live authentically too early. Sal Mineo was not only erased by Hollywood while he was alive, he was also denied by society the chance to grow old in peace. George Maharis, a career ended by a single private moment. George Maharis was one of America's brightest television stars in the early 1960s. Born in 1928, he rose to fame as Buzz Murdoch on the hit series Route 66. Maharis embodied a familiar American masculinity, calm, confident, and just rebellious enough to captivate mainstream audiences. At his peak, George Maharis was considered an A-list television star with clear potential to transition into film. But like many others on this list, his private life was a secret that was never allowed to exist publicly. Today, scholars and journalists regard Maharis's homosexuality as an established fact, though he never publicly came out during his lifetime. The tragedy struck in 1963. Confidential magazine, a notorious and deeply feared tabloid of the era, published an article implying that George Maharis had been involved in a gay gathering using heavily moralizing language. A single article without clear evidence was enough to freeze a star's career. The consequences were almost immediate. Maharis was gradually removed from Route 66, lost his leading role, and was no longer trusted by major studios. The media stopped presenting him as a heartthrob, replacing admiration with avoidance. There was no redemption arc, no comeback story. Hollywood's doors closed quietly. Unlike many other stars, George Maharis did not enter a sham marriage or attempt to construct a new facade. He accepted a life of privacy and slowly withdrew from the spotlight. By the late 1960s, he reduced his acting work, turning toward music and painting, living a quiet life far removed from the world that once celebrated him. George Maharis's tragedy lies in the fact that his career did not collapse due to lack of talent, but because a private moment was exposed at the wrong time. He was given no opportunity to explain, nor any chance to recover. A single implication was enough to end everything. George Maharis lived until 2023, but his stardom had faded more than 6 decades earlier. His story is a stark reminder that in Hollywood's golden age, some careers did not end in failure, but in a silence that lasted a lifetime. Hollywood once made us believe that fame was eternal, that stage lights could conceal every fracture. But the stories you've just read reveal a far harsher truth. One wrong relationship, one love deemed unacceptable, or one moment of affection outside the approved script could cause an entire career to collapse overnight. If one of these stories haunted you the most, comment with the number of that figure and share your honest reaction. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next part we will go even deeper into the names, lives, and truths Hollywood tried to erase.